Welcome to Represent NYC. I'm Assemblyman Richard Gottfried. I represent the 75th Assembly District on the west side of Manhattan, covering the Chelsea neighborhood, a lot of Hell's Kitchen, and a lot of Midtown, and a little of the Upper West Side. These are all neighborhoods that are have always, for as long as I remember, been under threat of excessive development and loss of a lot of our historic buildings and human scale development. Those pressures are stronger than ever before, and so you've got a lot of developers who are figuring out ways to evade our zoning and building codes to build higher and higher and get more and more wealth out of a piece of property, and at the same time to threaten a lot of our historic and human scale buildings. And that is all our topic this evening. And we've got three guests who know a lot about this very topic. Our first guest is Councilmember Ben Kallos, who represents the 5th City Council District, which is a large part of the Upper East Side and Roosevelt Island and a little of East Harlem, maybe a couple of other pieces of territory. Our second guest is Sean Khorsandi, who is the Executive Director of Landmarks West, which for many, many, many years has been an extraordinary organization on the Upper West Side, fighting for historic preservation and landmarking and defending preservation of our human scale development. And last but not least, Mario Messina, who is the president of the 29th Street Neighborhood Association, which covers a lot of the Madison Square area. I guess some of that area is nowadays being called Nomad, meaning yes, north of Madison Square, and a lot of the Flatiron area. There's a lot of talk nowadays about super tall buildings and something called mechanical voids, which I think until a couple of years ago I had never heard of. What are super tall buildings, and what are mechanical voids, and why are they invading?
Well, first, Assemblymember Gottfried, thank you for your leadership on this issue and leadership on so very many issues. You've been fighting for single payer. That may now be a reality. You've been fighting for legalization. That's actually going to happen this year, and you've actually authored
of cannabis.
Of
yeah,
cannabis,
right?
And
not just everything, but right.
That is correct, and,
right.
And you were actually the author of GENDA and Gender Non-Discrimination Act, and that was actually just signed into law. And,
yeah,
and you've been carrying this for decades, and just so honored to be here. And I think one of the reasons it's amazing that you're hosting this issue is just because you've always been a leader on issues that no one ever thought could be won. And so when we started to look at things like 432 Park Avenue, which is, if anyone isn't familiar, it's that straight building that's just squares and really tall on 57th Street. It gave birth to Billionaires Row. And the issue was that all of a sudden the technology allowed for you to put up a very narrow building on an 80-foot lot. And when we did an analysis of it, 25% of the building is empty. You can actually see through it, and it's because they have these voids, these spaces in it that are theoretically for mechanicals, for HVAC equipment or for other mechanicals, but ultimately it's just empty. And so we started to see these super talls. And so technically—
now, why does a developer want to build a whole lot of empty space?
There's something broken about the way we're planning cities now, that a developer would actually rather build empty space than affordable housing. But at the end of the day, you can only build so much in a place. And what they're trying to do is just put the building on stilts so that they can build buildings for billionaires. And these people are often absentee. They're not paying taxes here. But now you can charge—
is it because they just want to be on a 900-foot top of the building apartment as opposed to a mere 500-foot top of the building apartment?
You've got it. You can sell that apartment for hundreds of millions of dollars for those helicopter views, which I don't really think we need to do. And I think we can build buildings in our city, but they should be in scale with the neighborhood. And there's no reason to build buildings that are just empty.
And I guess for zoning purposes, zoning counts the number of floors in a building, and if one of your floors is 100 feet high, it still counts as one floor.
Actually, mechanical spaces don't even count, so they're not even paying for that one floor. So all the other floors count, but that 150 feet they get for free.
The building at 249 East 62nd in your district, tell me about what that is proposed for, and what's the fight been like about that?
Sure. At 249 East 62nd Street, you have the same architect who did 432 Park, Raphael Vignoli, and now he wants to put in a new one. And so what they did is you have 12 stories, and you have commercial use, and then you have residential, and it looks like a normal building, and then all of a sudden, they just have an empty void. It looks like a stilt, it looks like the Jetsons, it goes up 150 feet, and then you have the remaining 12 stories of the building, and it looks like a barbell, it looks like the Jetsons, and ultimately it's just taking things to an extreme. And we actually had an opportunity to meet with your office, Senator Liz Krueger's office, Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer's office, Friends of the Upper East Side Historic District, Landmark West, and we sat and talked about how we could get around this issue. And we'd love to do a height cap, but city planning had said no to that, and so we all came together, and with your support and your willingness to do something on the state level if the city wouldn't act, we're able to come and make a very compelling case to the Department of City Planning that we couldn't have buildings just on stilts.
Yeah, and we'll talk in a little bit about what the City Planning Commission is proposing. In Albany, my colleague to the north, Linda Rosenthal, has put in a bill amending the multiple dwelling law, which is state law, but that sort of defines what a floor is, and I'm the second name on her bill. And so we're approaching it from both the city level and the state level. Sean, in Landmark West's turf, you've got 200 Amsterdam Avenue at 69th as an issue, and 30 West 66th Street. How are those fights going, and how much of an issue for the whole Upper West Side is this becoming?
It's becoming a major issue, and it's literally the source of 90% of our calls, at least. And the problem is that Billionaires Row right now is at Central Park South for the most part, and that's capping a business district. It is now infiltrating the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side. The Upper East Side is the nation's densest neighborhood, and the Upper West Side comes in at number 2. So there's a question of, do we need all this construction right on these blocks? And what we're looking at 200 Amsterdam, it's a gerrymandered zoning lot. So the developer has cut and pasted various strips of land from between a mid-century superblock that was assembled. So normally you can assemble air rights from within your block, and the sidewalks and streets separate those. But because under Robert Moses, the city gave back these streets and sidewalks, there's a larger catchment area. And the way this development is structured, the proposed building that's under construction will be 668 feet tall. It'll be a luxury building, 4 avenues from Central Park. It's being marketed.
I often prefer to say high-priced rather
High-priced.
than luxury.
And it'll
Who knows whether it'll be luxury? We know it'll be high-priced.
Well, most luxury buildings do not have parking for strangers in your rear yard, and that will be the case here. So there's a lot of amenities intended in this construction that were not part of the baseline decision in creating Lincoln Towers in the first place. On the site at 66th Street, we have a developer who initially filed for a 25-story building, merging 3 small properties and a synagogue site. And during that time, they were also assembling additional properties from another nonprofit and transferring air rights from the First Battery Armory. So they've tried to refile an amendment for this 25-story building, and now are proposing a 775-foot tower, which is 25 feet taller than the Time Warner Center. But in reality, it will only be 39 floors. So the Time Warner Center is 55 floors. And this is all being manifest because there's the 17th, 18th, and 19th floors are a mechanical sandwich, and the 18th floor alone is expected to rise, per their design, 161 feet. So the equivalent of a 3rd Avenue NYU dorm.
Wow. And you know, one lesson from this is that when the 200 Amsterdam Avenue building was being talked about, that's like 660 or so feet. Now they can say, well, we're only 660 feet. I mean, look at 30 West 66. They want 770 feet. We're just a little building of 600 something. You know, it's this evolution, or if that's what you want to call it, just creates
It's the precedent that feeds on itself, and that's the concern. Right now, in the 90s, the Millennium 2 Tower was built at 545 feet, and that includes a movie theater, special gyms, it was the Reebok Center. There were multiple other amenities and reasons for taller floors there. And now we're going to be highly in excess of that for fewer floors. And it's not the density that people are concerned about, because in all this will be 125 apartments. It's the fact that this new building will literally tower over its neighbors. It's more than twice as tall as the next tallest building on the block. It's going to impact the Central Park West skyline. It will cast shadows to the Children's Zoo in Central Park.
And every developer will say, you know, if they got to build 700 plus feet, why can't I? Yeah.
And this is the other question where planning and zoning comes into play. This building, in fact, falls within a Lincoln Square Special Zoning District, which has specific rules. And in 1993, part of this assembly was identified as a potential soft site, a development site. And at that time, city planning wrote regulations saying they expected this building to be mid-20 to 32 stories in height. Mm-hmm. So that, at the time, meant 250 to 320 feet, approximately. Right now, we're looking at 39 stories, which is more than they anticipated, and more than twice the height. And city planning doesn't seem too motivated to act against that.
Yeah. Okay. Mario, in the 29th Street Neighborhood Association part of town, what's happening, and what is the community trying to do about it?
Well, quite a bit. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for all the support that you gentlemen are giving us in our daily fights with quality of life, with the building of these super tall, even if they are not the 50, 60 story high buildings. Given the context in which they are built right now in our area, they are super talls, even if they are only 40, 44 stories. We have lost a lot of fabric of our neighbors.
Only in Manhattan could you say only 44 stories.
Yes, yeah, exactly. In our area, in our neighbor, basically. But what is going on, unfortunately, is the destruction of what the fabric of Manhattan, of what the fabric of New York is being, what has made this city so attractive to all of us. Another big problem that we're facing is the concentration of new unwanted and unneeded constructions. The quality of life is deteriorating. How we are fighting it, basically knocking at your doors, helping for your support, trying to work with LPC to preserve the buildings that have been destroyed so far in a very great number of cases. We are
LPC, the Landmarks Preservation Commission.
Yes, Landmarks Preservation Commission, yes. Some we win, some we lose. Unfortunately, is not something that has a very set way of handling things, because the loopholes that they are in the laws are subject to interpretations depending on who is sitting in the chair that day. And that is something that we're trying to work very hard to change. It's not simple, but eventually, sooner or later, we'll manage to do something, again, with your help. We are right now trying to avoid the destruction of the building that is a beautiful structure on 29 between Park and Lexington Avenue. Is being turned off by Landmark Preservation Commission, because they don't believe that it has enough merit to be preserved. But it is a similar building of one of the ones that the Landmark Preservation Commission has granted the status of preservation.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, although we have appealed to the developers to try to sit down with us to preserve the structure and to build on it, to do a reuse, which is very much a smart thing to do, like they're doing right now on 255th Avenue, to preserve the fabric, to yes, build, modernize the area, do whatever you need to do, but to destroy a building that has over 100 years of history, to replace it with another hotel, which is going to be like an eyesore that's got nothing to do with the fabric of where we're living, and it's going to create more chaos than anything else, is terrible.
Thank you. Now, the City Planning Commission has put out a proposal to, they feel, deal with the issue of mechanical voids. Sean, can you explain a little of what that proposal does and what its shortfalls are?
Sure. The proposal is suggesting that you have a maximum of 25 feet of mechanical that still would count as free. It does not count against your floor area ratio in the body of the building. So anything in the cellar or basement levels, anything on the roof above the last habitable floor is still freebie, unlimited. So within the body of the building, you can have up to 25 feet of mechanical rise, and you can have that again as long as you have 75 feet of programmed area before you repeat it. So if you have 25 feet high of mechanical space and then you want to have 7 or 8 floors, you can then have it again. And there's really absolutely no need for that frequency. Typically, if you have a 20-story office building, you could get away with 1 mechanical floor or mechanical space on the roof. So that 75-foot sandwich would more appropriately be 200 feet of a sandwich at least of a rise. That's a start. The other thing is that unfortunately this happens only in R9 and R10 residential districts. So it's a very limited window. It affects very few buildings, and it only affects enclosed mechanical space.
And
so
R9 and R10 is areas where you can build a residential building of a certain
high-density residential neighborhoods. And what's confusing, what a lot of people don't understand, is in the R10, which is where the building on 66th Street is, you have to have 55% of your floor area below 150 feet in height. So it forces this idea called bulk packing, where they want to have a lot of thin floors at the base so you can squeeze in as much floor area, and then it literally incentivizes these gaps, and that's what we're seeing with this 161-foot gap. So even if the developer were to redesign the building, that doesn't mean that the height will come down from 775 feet. They can restructure it. It can be more of a perforated building like 432 Park Avenue. And on top of that, the upper floors are ever increasing in height. So as we had mentioned, 25 to 32 stories was the anticipation. And that was figuring 10-foot floor-to-floor height, which was a standard pretty much through 2012. And right now we're seeing that standard evolve and grow to 14 feet to 16 foot 5 inches. So when you have 10 foot becoming 16 foot 5 inches, you already have a 60% inflation of each building, and that's for the same floor area.
Under the proposal, apart from the fact that every few floors you could have another 25-foot mechanical, what if you put in a blank space and say it's not mechanical? It's just, you want to count it as 1 floor of residential? Okay, but it's still going to be 150 feet.
Absolutely. So
is that tolerated under the
Under
proposal?
the current proposal, the developer wouldn't have to spend a dime restructuring the building, wouldn't have to spend a dime hiring any new zoning consultants. They could just change that 18th floor to a super's apartment, to a party room and amenity space. It could be the building's laundry. It could just be another apartment. And they wouldn't have to...
Or a place where you could come and meditate.
You could meditate, you could test skydiving, you could bungee jump, you could do anything you could do in 161 feet of rise.
And the other thing is, I gather it says that if the blank space is not completely walled in, it doesn't count.
This is our understanding. If it's a skinned structure, that doesn't apply within this new zoning text amendment. It would still fly under the radar.
Or if it has walls on 3 sides and part of a 4th side, but has open space.
Less than 67% enclosed.
Yeah.
It becomes a patio.
And exempt from the regulations.
Correct. And this is just one of the many loopholes. So the building you mentioned at 200 Amsterdam, even though the mechanical space impedes the sky exposure plane, that's not a problem for the city. And they're not using excessive mechanicals, but they're using gerrymandered zoning lots. On 62nd Street, they're using stilts.
Yeah.
Right now, you could have an interior atria of excessive volume, and that doesn't count because you're cutting away the floor area. There's a number of loopholes, and the problem is we need city planning to be proactive and be on the offensive, because these rules in many cases have existed since 1961, and we're seeing abuses of them today. We saw stilts at City Core, and that's a landmark now. But nobody expected every building to have stilts. Well, now it's becoming the reality, and not for public buildings, but for residential buildings.
And there have been a couple of mentions about today about engineering advances. I mean, my understanding is that in the 1960s, if you wanted to build a 100 stories high, narrow building, they didn't know how to do that. And that some of this is technology that is enabling these buildings to be very thin but extremely high.
Part of it's technology, part of it's slip form construction, part of it's sideways injection molding for footings, but another part of it is just the scarcity of land, the cost of land acquisition, and the new value placed on views that just didn't exist 10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at these buildings, I mean, it seems to me, how come it doesn't fall over? But maybe that tells you what I know about engineering. I mean, I look at cruise ships and say, how come that doesn't fall over? But obviously they don't.
There is wind bracing. Some of these have mass tuned dampers on the top. A lot of them are built intending to sway, because if it's too rigid, it'll break. And this is also what's causing problems for some of the developers in selling these penthouses. People are either complaining that from their couch they don't have a view of New York City anymore because they're too high up, or that they're feeling a little queasy or nauseous because of the constant sway.
The other odd news is at one point there was softness in the market for these super talls because there was concern that they didn't have enough billionaires to purchase all of these units. It seems that with the current administration on the federal level, that concern about not having enough billionaires has subsided, and I guess with the way we've rewritten our tax structure, there are now more billionaires to buy more of these units.
And I gather some of these sales of apartments are basically people from other countries who are simply looking for a place to park wealth. It's, you could buy gold bars and put them in the bank, or you could buy an apartment 1,000 feet up.
My really basic question here is, as a normal citizen, is who is benefiting from the building of all these super tall buildings? Because they are not resolving the housing crisis that we have in the city. And I think that is one of the basic questions that we have to ask ourselves and see how we can go about in order to try to eliminate this trend that is going on.
Okay, we've got a couple minutes left. What can people do about this? What should people watching do tomorrow if they want to do something about this?
So I would say that, as Sean mentioned, we have a lot of concerns about what city planning has put forward. But if we don't do anything and we leave the status quo, we're going to see more and more buildings being built with these voids. And so what we're hoping is that folks will participate in their community boards, which meet every single month in your local community. You can go to the Manhattan Borough President's website to see which community board is yours, and come out to community board. Participate in the city planning process and how we can improve this. For my sake, right now, if we don't do anything, East 62nd Street will likely move forward, East 66th Street will move forward, and then a whole class of new buildings will come. I'm eager to try to close this loophole just as the developers are going to create new ones. And to be honest, I'm a person who is an entrepreneur, and you always have government regulation and innovation, and they will always challenge each other. But so I'm hoping that folks will come out in support of closing this voids loophole, and that with experts at Landmark West, and if people are interested, giving donations to groups like Landmark West is important, and then also supporting elected officials like you who are willing to fight this fight on the state level. But ultimately, I would just say, please come out to your community board and city planning hearings on this topic.
Block associations, neighborhood associations.
Yes. Join your local block association.
One thing I would say is just pay attention. So many people, we've done mailings, we've done emailings, I've been at neighborhood laundry room presentations, talking to people in co-ops a block away who still seem unaware of what's going on. And people should look into the bills you're proposing regarding gerrymandered zoning lots, into the bills that Assemblymember Rosenthal is proposing, which would limit floor-to-floor height. Think about the type of city we want. And we, from Landmark West standpoint, are looking that next step, right? Building codes are there for our safety. They're not to penalize a developer or to stop construction or to stop growth. We had tenement law reform after Jacob Riis. We have fire department safety enacted after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. We don't have to have the disaster to react in this case. The writing is on the wall. This is obviously not a good idea to send someone up 16 floors wearing 45 pounds of gear to then get stuck in a 161-foot tall chimney just to reach the next potential floor where there might be signs of life. And
You're talking about firefighters.
Firefighters,
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
It's diverting resources, and that's more time spent and wasted that isn't helping the next person that needs it in a densifying city.
I think that information is paramount because every New Yorker in his daily busy life can only read whatever concerns him. A lot of these problems that we're facing on a daily basis are going undetected. And unless we really all together disseminate information that will alert people, they will only find out that something is going to hurt them when it is already too late.
Okay, well, we are just about out of time. I want to thank our guests today, Councilmember Ben Kallos from the East Side, Sean Khorsandi, the Executive Director of Landmark West, Mario Messina, the President of the 29th Street Neighborhood Association. We've been talking about super tall buildings and threats of excessive development here on Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and thank you for joining us.